In this new machine age, we'll see many resemblances to the high-tech, low-life society of dystopian science fiction. There will be material and technological advancements alongside spiritual and psychological decline.
Some people who could catch up the wave will be rich, will be more successful. Some people will be more painful.
San Francisco, not for sale.
This is really like the scariest problem to me.
And as people become more dependent on machines, we'll have to reconstruct our roles in society and grapple with how we'll find meaning in our lives. Attention will become a rare commodity as our addiction to technology impedes our ability to listen, observe, and empathize with others. Meanwhile, high neuroticism will become the norm as people fear their own irrelevancy. And the brain's default mode network, which is the default state when we're not given anything to do, is anything but calm. It tends to ruminate about the past, process emotions, and worry about the future. So a more neurotic population is going to have a more unpleasant default state of being. And that will invite in a whole industry of professionals ready to come in and fix that problem through analysis or therapy or drugs or machines. And we have to be careful not to become addicted to any of these solutions. The psychiatric establishment has invented more and more disorders that has medicalized human nature. Over 70 years ago, there were only a handful of mental illnesses, and today we have hundreds of them.
They meet at the American Psychiatric Association. They meet in the DSM committee, Diagnostic Statistical Manual Committee, and they vote on making new behavioral and emotional disorders. And they vote, and then they start immediately calling them diseases.
By classifying people's behaviors as disorders, these so-called experts can more easily stigmatize and control people. And they've been doing this for hundreds of years. Back when slaves in the South ran away, they were diagnosed with the disease drapetomania. And back when women used to rebel against their husbands, they were diagnosed with hysteria.
So when school authorities tell a mother, as you already heard, that her son is sick and needs to be on drugs, how in the world is she to know that that is simply a lie? How is she to recognize that what experts now call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is simply not a disease? No behavior or misbehavior is a disease or can be a disease. If he is sick, then there must be some objective science to it, which can be diagnosed by physicians and objective tests.
Oh, in my practice I don't do any tests. I just speak with people and listen to them, and then I make a decision in what kind of illness there should be.
What kind of biological tests do we have available today for detecting mental illnesses?
None.
Temper tantrums are now called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and everyday worries has been called general anxiety disorder. And back in the 1980s, we widened our clinical definition of depression by combining this broad range of symptoms under the one label, major depressive disorder. And that umbrella term doesn't distinguish between serious cases that require hospitalization from the feeling of melancholy and everyday sadness. So we've medicalized the natural human condition that's been around since at least the first human. And many traditions remind us of this. Like in Buddhism, the first noble truth is life is suffering, because birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. And the Stoics have a saying that sometimes even to live is an act of courage. And Christianity has a symbol of Jesus nailed to a cross. And as the psychiatrist Thomas Szasz pointed out, most people don't suffer from psychological problems. They actually suffer from problems of living. And our current schools of psychological interventions don't address problems of living very well. One intervention is called psychoanalysis, and it was developed by Sigmund Freud back in the 1890s. And it goes deep by confronting our moral and existential problems lurking beneath our every thought and action. It asserts that we have these deeper unconscious desires that ultimately stem from repressed sexual urges and childhood angst. And these desires manifest themselves in our everyday actions, often under the guise of seemingly more noble actions. So deep down, everything has to do with some sexual urge, and if we can just find the hidden sexual meaning behind our thoughts, then we can live an existence free of conflict. And psychoanalysts use a process called free association, where the client talks, often facing away from the psychoanalyst, about any thoughts that come to mind. And every thought can be a symbol of a deeper meaning that's lurking beneath our consciousness. But Freud didn't provide guidelines of when I should interpret a hug as a simple hug, or when that hug is some symbol for some repressed sexual urge stemming from my childhood relationship with my parents. So I can basically explore everything with this sort of hyper-intellectual guessing where I make up reasons for any of my thoughts. And that can very easily fill up an hour-long session of a fictional autobiography. So we can obsess over hidden meanings as we read anything we choose into anything we want. And as we're caught in this endless exploration of any thought, trivial or profound, we kind of lose judgment about what truly matters. It's like mindlessness gone wild. Only social intelligence will make psychoanalysis useful, because empathy helps us find the emotional meaning unique to each person. And creativity helps us see things from a new perspective, so we can apply new meanings to old interpretations. And good psychoanalysts must have more social intelligence than their clients if they hope to guide them toward more honest interpretations. Another widely used therapeutic intervention today is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it originated in the 1960s. CBT follows from the premise that people's problems ultimately stem from these negative patterns of thought.
There was something wrong with me.
Everything I want to do is selfish.
Feel the pain.
I am frightened of Donald Trump.
So if we can change our thoughts, often by reframing them to more positive narratives, then we can alter our behavior. And CBT has been shown to be quite effective in helping people with problems of exaggerated self-narratives, because these people tend to overgeneralize, magnify, and jump to conclusions without any evidence.
Low self-esteem can cripple your child's chances of success. The cure? Praise they can hold in their hands. Certificates, ribbons, and yes, even trophies.
Reframing these distorted thoughts can help people escape a negative feedback loop that often leads to anxiety, depression, and obsessive compulsions. But the practice of encouraging everyone to think their way to happiness can also lead to narcissistic tendencies, where we focus almost entirely on ourselves and ignore our greater social environments. It's what psychopaths do when they tell themselves, "You're beautiful just as you are," as they go around doing however they please without regard for others. We can reframe our negative self-narratives all we want, but if we don't change our behaviors, then we probably shouldn't be surprised by the consequences. Because sometimes we deserve what we get, and no amount of positive thinking can force someone else to respect me regardless of how I behave. Another common approach says that chemical imbalances in our brains cause our mental disorders. And that's how antidepressants rose to prominence.
Many claim that it transforms them, makes them more calm, more confident, more productive.
I thought, what will happen if we can do this with people who've never been depressed? You know, if you could put someone on a medicine and he or she would become more socially adept. And I coined a term, cosmetic psychopharmacology, where the analogy was cosmetic surgery, so a medical procedure done for something other than treating illness.
And in the late 2000s, adults in the US consumed 4 times more antidepressants than they did in the early 1990s. And by 2017, 11% of people over age 12 in the US were on some form of antidepressants, and 60% of them had been on pills for over 2 years. Meanwhile, we've overdiagnosed depression. So the efficacy of antidepressants has dropped from 70% down to 40%. That's only 10% higher than placebo treatments. And let's not forget the common side effects, which include insomnia, diarrhea, dizziness, drowsiness, dry mouth, nausea, headaches, indigestion, weakness, loss of appetite, quivering, and nervousness. But who cares? These are just side effects, right?
Now don't worry. She'll be fine after years of expensive treatment. And we have a new drug to combat this syndrome. Ignore it all. It turns this to this.
The psychiatric and pharmaceutical industry has promulgated that theory, hypothesis, why someone has a mental illness. Oh, you have a brain chemical imbalance. There's no proof of that.
These drugs are producing multiple biochemical imbalances in brains that don't have any biochemical imbalance.
The treatment isn't more of the drug that causes a deficiency. The treatment is stopping the drug or cutting that down and then replenishing the nutrient that's missing.
While antidepressants are crucial for people with severe mental disorders, they don't address problems of living, and they actually dull our lived experience. And future technologies that can read our chemical imbalances or toy with our neurochemicals are not going to help us better understand our subjective experience. Machines won't make good psychoanalysts or CBT therapists or drug pushers, but they can scan the brain. And nowadays, fMRI scanners can visually show us activity in the brain. And that's giving us the illusion of greater understanding. Because people like to believe that if we can see more data, then of course we must have greater knowledge. But does it really matter what part of my brain lights up when I'm feeling triggered? And does it give me permission to act like a jerk if I can just say, oh, it's because my amygdala is acting up? Now, one important thing that brain scans have confirmed is neuroplasticity, that our brain changes according to the habits that we practice. So professional violinists have larger areas of the brain associated with finger movement, and taxi drivers have larger brain regions associated with topology. Meanwhile, meditators who spend hours introspecting have larger regions associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. But does this surprise anyone who's developed any skill in anything through practice? If consistent effort did not produce results, then why would we work hard at anything? Brain scans can help us see what goes on in our brains, but not in our minds. And they can't tell us what meanings we should make. So we still require social intelligence if we want to examine our subjective experience, our thoughts, our emotions, our meanings, that then lead to the brain activity that then gets picked up by the machine. Machine learning technologies will get better at scanning the brain and diagnosing mental disorders, but they can't solve problems of anxiety and depression coming from meaninglessness. And you probably don't rely on a thermostat to tell you that you're feeling too hot. So you also don't need a brain scan to tell you what emotions you're feeling.
What should we do? Not just throw up our hands. Now, what we should do cannot be answered in a generic form because we are dealing with individual human beings. Now, here, what will help depends entirely on that individual, money, social standing, who they are, their own spirit, what they want to do about it.
People suffering from severe mental disorders or trauma should definitely go seek help. But for those who suffer from problems of living, there are several life skills necessary for psychological health. All of these help manage the brain's default mode network, and all of them require social intelligence, because you have to understand how the variables in your social systems impact your everyday behaviors. First, you have to have a routine, and you can't develop a routine if you don't know how to manage the social influences that eat away at your time. You also have to regulate drugs and alcohol, and you can't do that well if you're easily swayed by social pressure or if you suffer from loneliness. You also have to regulate how and what you eat, and even that has a social component, because people often under or overeat due to stress and difficult emotions stemming from factors in their social environments. You also need to have relationships, and healthy relationships require sociability and empathy. And research shows that children must develop sociability by the age of 4 if they hope to develop it at all. And it also shows that children often find a best friend between the ages of 5 and 10, because it teaches them how to put another's needs ahead of their own. You also need a career or something productive to do with your time, because people cannot even experience sustained positive emotion if they don't have an aim and feel like they're progressing towards something. You don't need to have all of these components, but if you're missing most of them, you're probably prone to the trappings of neuroticism, anxiety, and depression. Because mental health is a function of our psychophysio-neurological ecosystems embedded within greater social systems. So no matter how advanced the technologies around us, only a whole systems approach can lead to sustained mental health.